Welcome to session 3 of fiscal sustainability for the city of Loveland. Let's see, we started out by saying if you have your electronic leash, please put it on Do Not Disturb. Working out a strategy with the city clerk where we're going to put up multiple flashing message boards in this room that say silence your cell phones. It's the curse, I guess, of the 21st century that your electronic leash not only distracts you and tells you everything else that's going on in the world, but makes it very clear to everybody else in the room that you're not paying attention to what's going on in the room. And that has not been happening here. One of the things that I've noticed that I need to go back and touch on again, because we've had some different attendance from 2 weeks ago and last week, and even a few new faces this week. If you get a chance to look at the big sheet of paper here over on the other side of my fellow CFAC member Bruce Finger, we had a substantial agenda. And I accept that maybe something that was put up on the city webpage was unclear about the expectations and the processes that were going to be connected in this third session. The basic answer of this third session is that we did not do 4 hours last week. We had too much to do with what was required last week with going into the small group breakouts. The decided standard was a 2-hour meeting, asking for people to volunteer their time. And so it became necessary to really use this third night, but we have accomplished all of the polling and the ranked voting and the manipulation of data. We got feedback from small groups with ideas and recommendations, and what we need to do tonight is we need to present all of those recommendations and ideas, look for clarification, ask questions, and capture the information that's going to go forward. Because I did mention it 2 weeks ago, I did not mention it last week. All the work that is being done in this group is being captured by Citizens Finance Advisory Commission. We're going to examine it in the month of March, and we have to report and we have to preserve all of this information and give it to City Council on the 22nd of March. So the hard work for the CFAC members, and CFAC members will stand up and reveal yourselves that you're going to be carrying this on. Okay? Again, we are one of your fellow citizen volunteer commissions. We're taking everything that you presented, all of the ideas and the recommendations that you have made, they will all be reported to City Council. Our chore is going to be to take all of that information and see if we can come to a majority agreement of highly recommended actions or ideas that are going to require more examination from the city staff, just because in another 2-hour meeting and with time spent in between meetings, there's only so much that CFAC can do. So, I guess my first point is everything will be reported and will be provided to council. We are not going to filter, exclude, or try to do anything more than what is presented tonight. We do have to produce a report. And so CFAC members will try to go through and find something that we think is of particular value to City Council. The staff certainly will learn what we have contributed. So as citizens wanting to do better for our community, our voices will be heard in the upcoming city budget preparation process. CFAC, as a continuously meeting commission, we'll continue to look at the fiscal imbalance question of why are the revenues not matching with the city expenses. and, you know, take ownership of the ideas that are shared tonight. And so we're going to go into everything that our small groups produced last week. We're going to present those items and give a representative, either a facilitator or somebody from each of our small breakout groups, a chance to clarify and emphasize the points that were offered. And certainly when we see the different lists coming up from the groups coming up on the screen here, we'll do our best to respond to questions about them. And so, you know, we've got kind of an exchange of ideas of this is what we were talking about in our group. We tried to record it on the butcher sheet paper. Now it's up on the screen. You know, clarify and expand on the idea, and we'll try and, you know, capture that additional understanding. And that's part of the challenge to the CFAC to carry that forward in coming weeks and communicate it to City Council. Any questions or need for additional clarification about the expectations for tonight and what's going to happen after tonight? Yes, sir.
Will we have possession of what you will present to the City Council?
Everything that CFAC does is a matter of public record.
Okay.
What we do in our meetings is public record. What we send to City Council will be public record.
Okay.
My intention in preparing CFAC to build our report is that all of the weekly reports that have been sent out by email and have been posted on the city website, those become the background information attachments to our report. The task for CFAC is to say, okay, can we look at all that background information and go beyond CFAC hosted 3 meetings? Here's the results. Can CFAC come to individual points of information and say, you know, we have a majority, and we have a majority agreement that this is a particular point that needs to be highlighted and pushed forward to City Council. But everything will be sent forward to City Council.
Last week we captured several emails on a tablet of paper. So if you did not receive the results from last week's meeting, that means we don't have your email address. Would you please go ahead and write it on the tablet throughout the evening sometime, and we'll make sure that throughout this entire process we can communicate with all of our city members.
Will we get a copy of the bar graphs that you showed me there on the screen?
Sure, that was in the report that we, well, actually there weren't bar graphs, there were pie graphs in the report that we sent you for, but we can certainly produce the bar graphs if that's better. Would you like us to do that? Sure.
I would. It seems to me it gives a more clear picture.
Okay. Outstanding, we can do that for you.
Are there members of the lavender or light purple group still in the room? All right, congratulations. Thank you for the information that you have provided. And I think the floor would be open for either a member of this group to clarify what's on screen or for anyone else to ask questions. John?
As the facilitator, I was...
You want to take over now?
Just
All right, I'll be here to catch hands and make sure that your questions get answered, and John will take us the rest of the way through the slides.
We had a pretty good discussion with our group. As you see, we came up with a number of ideas of things we do, but our top 3 were first to determine the legitimate role of government, because the feeling of the group was that we needed a way to define our decision making, and this would be the best tool if we could do that. However, the con to that was that they recognized that was very difficult to do, and that's a pretty broad spectrum, and different people, reasonable people can reasonably disagree on what the legitimate role of government is. So who makes that decision and who do it is the difficulty in it. The second one was the cost-benefit decision-making. And they thought that that should be used to justify and prioritize any of the different decisions, is the cost-benefit ratios. The con to that is it is very difficult to analyze. And getting all the variables that you need and doing that, there's a lot of work in putting a cost-benefit analysis together for every one of those different service areas that we have listed for you. And our third one was a department director review. And there was those in the group that said the department directors, if we just encourage them to look at their budgets, they could encourage analysis of their operations and a way to bring it down. The dissenting opinion said that there's a very good chance that department directors would be protecting their own turf, and so their analysis would essentially keep status quo and we wouldn't receive our results. If I misrepresented us, anybody in my group, speak up, but that's a summary of where we landed the other night.
Any additional comments from members
Well, are
of
you going to
the
continue
light
with the rest of the things we talked about?
You're welcome to pick one out and,
If you think,
Yeah, I will, if he's not going to read it.
yes. Well, his only requirement, I think, is to catch the ones that were pushed at the top. If you want
It was
to
a
give extra
summary.
emphasis to something for tonight, please
Yeah.
do.
Determine the second dot down in the smaller print. Determine legitimate functions, shed others. There was a great deal of discussion in the group about what is the role of municipal government. And I think the general weight of opinion in that group was that is the function of municipal government to provide services that are open to all of the taxpayers in the city, not just a special group, that and everybody will have access to them, and it benefits everybody in the city, not just a special group. And I think there was some strong disagreement, at least I strongly disagreed with the opposing that it's difficult to do. I don't think it's any harder than any other decision deciding what the proper function of government is. And that was one of the strong points that came out of that group. The other thing about departments, yeah, that was a worry that a department head's not going to really cut, because if you've ever been in corporate structure or municipal structure or any government structure, what you find is that department heads don't want their budgets cut. And they will do anything they can to stop that. And if you're going to leave it at the department head level, you're not going to get anything. One of the things that I wanted to see, I'm doing an awful lot of talking, and I'm sorry about this. All this is moving, I'll shut up. One of the things that none of us knows in this room are this whole list of programs you saw on board, all the transportation, all the little get-togethers for everyone, all the social stuff. Never once were we shown what the cost of those were. How can you make a recommendation to reduce government services by reducing programs unless you know what you're saying? Unless you're dealing with practical, usable information. We haven't heard any of that. There's a whole lot of things about this process that are leaving me hanging. I don't feel like I've contributed much other than some broad, general, emotionally satisfying or dissatisfying statements. And I would like to see I volunteer to do it if anybody else would. I'd like to see anybody else who would be interested in continuing to pursue this, to come up with some specific recommendations of what does the city of Loveland do to cut this budget here. And that question has not been answered in anything I've said in this presentation, or in any of the groups. Now, I go to my absolute, I'm sorry.
Well, let me go ahead and clarify and restate again. It is the responsibility of the Citizens Finance Advisory Commission, and it has been since CFAC was formed more than 16 years ago, to participate in the City of Loveland recommended budget process, to review the budget before it is presented to City Council, and CFAC takes ownership of this fiscal sustainability question and the budget gap, and we're not going to let go of it. We will continue to work towards a solution, please.
Perhaps one reason, and I understand what you're saying about not having a dollar value associated with all these things you were asked to consider. But perhaps one reason that wasn't there was because people are trying to get us to evaluate this, are trying to get us to look at things not from a dollar and cents total point of view, but what is really important, in our opinion, to the city of Loveland. And after we decide that, then look at the numerical. Because one of the things that sometimes happens is saying, that looks like a lot of money, this looks like less money, so let's cut that, when that may be of more value than that which is less costly. I don't know, but that's one way of looking at it.
Any further questions or comments on the Lavender Group? Go ahead.
I was a member of the Lavender Group also,
Okay.
and I agree with them.
Yeah.
I essentially feel the same way. I think there are some of us who may have lived here for a long time, or maybe involved in city processes, who actually would like to be able to sit down and bring specific proposals. And if CFAC is willing to work with us, I'm perfectly satisfied with that. But I do agree that it is not that difficult to do under determining the roles of government. You will get disagreements initially, but ultimately, making decisions and setting priorities is very hard to deal with doing political, but in business world and in household, it's not so hard. You push yourself a little harder. So I agree with John on what his observation.
All right. Blue. Who is facilitator for the Blue Group? Another question off of Lavender?
Just a quick question on the lavender.
Okay, can we go back to Lavender?
The comment that was made that the city should only fund services that serve all of the residents, and that all residents have access to. I'm wondering if that includes things that might fund a sector, just for instance, an ACE project, that a lot of citizens wouldn't have anything to do with in particular, but that if it would generate a lot more income and contribute to the well-being of the city and its finances, that would then benefit everybody. So I'm just wondering if that fits in with that one point.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, when you're dealing with any question of public policy, municipal government, at any level, particularly in the United States of America, there are always some contradicting points that play into that question of minority rule versus protection of minority rights. So those two have to be balanced, and I know it's very difficult to take specific program cuts to City Council. City Council does have the ultimate authority in decision when you've got the broad range of interests and priorities in City Council. CFAC can only make recommendations. The value of our group that we had the last couple of weeks is that we are broadening the scope and we are broadening the opportunity to present ideas and to communicate priorities as we go forward in the budget process. Okay.
I have a question, which is in regard to the gentleman's concern about the numbers not being available. Can you respond to his concern and also to the suggestion?
All of the numbers of every aspect of the city budget are always available. You can look at them anytime you want to, either by walking into the library, walking into the city clerk's office, pulling them off the web. Our direction, excuse me?
Budget books online.
Yeah, the budget books are online for at least the last 5 or 6 previous years. And once a proposed budget is presented to City Council, it's also available for you. We are at a foundational level. We are in this process trying to identify what is important to the citizens of Loveland as volunteers towards the commissions, as people requested to be here by City Council members, and as the people who are concerned enough about the city budget to respond to the newspaper ads to be here and lend their voices. What I did not want to see us get into was a fight seeing that $100,000 spent for a certain program is less important to Loveland than the $7+ million that's required for any of our larger departments. It isn't about making a monetary judgment at this step, because we've got 6 or 7 months left in the budget process. It's to clearly get the answers, what's important to people. What do you feel is necessary to maintain the quality of life of Loveland, to protect what you need to have so that the essential services are there, or so that some programs that we would be regretful if they were not lost without sufficient examination. That doesn't get too far ahead of us. Frank, you want to come in? Let me get Frank and you can come back.
Okay, going back to the Lavender thing, I think the important thing is that we decide what is the proper role of government. Now, I don't know that has ever been discussed by the city council or anybody. Now, my question really is, will we be privy to your internal discussions? Will you do that on your PD?
CFAC is usually not broadcast.
Okay. I think it would be very
the minutes and the minutes and the records of our meetings are published, and you can attend the meeting.
Okay.
We'll be back in here in 3 weeks.
But what I was going to say is I wanted to ask you if you see that is a legitimate point that you ought to answer that question. And if not, I would love to join John in saying let's keep this outside group going. So if you don't intend to do it, or the council doesn't, then we, the citizens, could.
Well, I think that's certainly true with any issue that's, that's before the city. What we know is that City Council opened the opportunity for public discussion on this fiscal sustainability issue and provided for the sponsorship of the 3 meetings, this being our final meeting, and has required CFAC to capture the information and report it back to council. What we do will be a matter of public record. The meeting is open to the public. I don't know if the resources are there to broadcast it. But what we do and what we recommend in its entirety and in the entirety of everything that was produced in these meetings will be public record and then will be available to council on March 22nd.
Okay,
I would encourage anyone who has something to add from our proceedings to be there on March 22nd and take the public report commentary time, as long as that's going to hold. Is the calendar slipping on me, Renee?
No, your calendar is fantastic.
Okay.
I want to reiterate that the 22nd is a study session environment, and council is not required today to comment.
Okay, so
Generally,
it would be the 22nd.
They're open to doing that, but I just want to give you the framework in which that you're doing. There'll be a series of public hearings. There'll be all kinds of opportunities for all of you to participate in every step of the process, and we encourage you to do that. That's really important. And quite frankly, we are thrilled that you're interested in the budget development process. It means a lot to us. What we do need to do, though, is move through these presentations so that we can get all the ideas on the table and make sure that we cover all that this evening. And we want to summarize all the results for you and then keep you engaged all the way along the way. So if we could kind of proceed through that and make sure that everything is captured, because there's some great ideas here.
Okay. Can we go to blue? Blue right here. Oh, my.
Hi, I'm Rich Valencia.
There he is.
I'll try and get through this pretty quickly. I'll obviously be giving my sort of focus on this list. We went through the list of 8 items you see on the chart that's included in that plan ad. I'm going to talk about the top 3 that we focused on being the top ones. In much the same manner that you talked about what is the legitimate role of government, there are services that evolve, that are provided, that aren't inside that scope or maybe a gray area. We said when you find those, find a way to pay for them with fees, pay for service. So the first step would be to identify what they may or may not be, okay, and then figure out what associated fees. I'm a big user of the Chilson Center, okay. It's dirt cheap, okay. I think the fees could go up for that, even though that would affect me, for example. And there are other, fees that can be charged by the city for things that are included in the general fund. The second bullet, we talked about lean manufacturing, but in reality, over the last 25 or 30 years, private industry, as we've moved towards a more global economy, has had to find ways to be more competitive internationally. Lean manufacturing, zero-based budgeting, activity-based costing, a whole bunch of different philosophies, even things like Six Sigma have been present and have evolved over that period of time. And it's a possible way we can bring some of those into the discussion for government to eliminate waste and really to focus on delivering quality services at the right cost. And the third item on the list is to identify services that the bulk of a community doesn't want to pay for. Gets back to the same thing we're talking about, what is the legitimate role, and I think it's a very good way of putting it, of municipal government. And there's going to be gray areas. There's going to be certain things that I think 100% of the community would agree on. Fire and law enforcement would be at the top. But as you move through that spectrum and continuum, at some place there's going to be a very small minority of people that would want to pay for them. Those are the ones that then move up to the top bullet that might become candidates for pay for service. Anybody else from my group want to add anything or talk about any other item on the group? Larry?
Yeah, I was a minority, but first of all, the staff has been very helpful in giving me some numbers, and I approach this from a little bit different business-minded. Ask the question, what percent of total general fund is payroll costs? They said 65%. Average salary for all the employees in the general fund, $55,000, plus 30% benefits on that, $71,000. 30% additionally out of the general fund, they said, I asked for outside services, which would be contractors and consultants. They said 30%. So that's 95% of the general fund. Now, they also, I asked them what they put in the forecast for projections going out for the dinner for $3 million or $3.5 million negative loss, and that was 2.5% annual pay increase. A very simplistic way of getting $3 million is to have no pay increase for 3 years. And of course, you're in the argument that they'll have a lot of people leave the city because of no pay increase and only making $55,000 on average per year, and I'm not sure that I would concur 100% with that.
Where are they going to go?
Any further points or questions for the blue group? Again, everything will be reported forward. Next, purple. And speaking of Lean Sigma 6, my CFAC member Bruce Finger from IBM.
You'll notice we have this up here as well, right? So you start to see some common items as you look across the charts, and I was reviewing them all this afternoon. And we have the, I believe it's the fourth bullet right here, where we talked about Baldrige, Six Sigma, and quality improvement programs. And I saw that mentioned on several of the slides. So it's interesting that there were so many groups, and there was a common theme that popped up in most of them. Yeah, the first couple of bullets that we have on here is related to Centera. And I saw that on several of the other groups as well, that Centerra does not pay an equal share of tax. So that's one of the things that we'll have to explore more and look at. The next bullet was on looking at property tax rebates and seeing if there's a way to cut there. There's Rialta, which is self-funded, or it should be self-funded versus being supplemented by the city. There were comments about not loaning money to businesses. We know that there were some areas that did not go so well for the city. I thought this bullet was really good, which is better market Loveland, which, you know, for cities like Fort Collins, I think the lady that suggested this actually was talking about how, you know, CSU comes in and all the hotels fill up in Fort Collins, and is there a way for Loveland to better market itself and like draw people here for overflow, or people that maybe don't want to spend, you know, rates are $100 a night there and they can pick something up here for $70 and they're willing to drive 10 miles. But the same thing with looking at places like out at Centerra, where there's a lot of people that we could draw in, or just get people in Loveland to not, you know, to shop here locally more, right? Where we spend an increased sales tax within our own city. So those two look good. Then fire, I saw in the paper that, you know, the city's actually looking at this, exploring a fire district. And the last two were this one I saw on several of the other charts as well, which is take a little bit more risk with some of the reserves that we have, or look at how we can get a greater return on the monies that the city has in the bank. And the last item that we ended with was, you know, let's not just cut 3.5, let's figure out how to cut more so that we can actually lower taxes in the city. Okay, anyone from the purple group that wants to add anything to that? Questions, comments?
Group members who may want to clarify any points that are up there.
Might I offer? I'm going to try not to respond to a lot of this because it's just, you know, this is great ideas. But I wanted to let you know that while some Centerra money, sales tax money goes into the district, remember that district money is helping to take care of the area out there. Also, how many of you are enjoying the I-25-34 intersection improvements? How many of you are enjoying the crossroad improvements that are made there, right? All those improvements are made possible by that money that goes over there. And so the city does still get a share of that 3%, but the other part goes to all those wonderful things that are happening. Okay? And then there was one other, on the fire. We are not looking at district, we are looking at authority, and there's a difference, okay? The district is a separate legal entity that has its own taxing authority and its own debt authority, okay? But we're not looking at that, we're looking at what's called an authority. So the city and the rural district would contribute and would have a board with representatives from both of those organizations to operate that organization. So I just looked at it.
Purple going once, twice, 3 times. Yellow. Is there a facilitator or representative for the yellow group?
I'm not sure that all of our members from our group are here tonight. I see most of them, but I think we're missing Neil. So some of these were generated from him, but I see 2 of our 3 that are in bold were highlighted. I think the 3rd one got missed. Bruce, the second one, the first one is eliminate the council reserve fund. The second one, Bruce just mentioned, which is that 3%, the tax, the parity between Centerra and what other places in Loveland are paying. So I won't repeat that, but that was also mentioned and prioritized in our group. And Neil had crunched some numbers and had come up with $3.9 million that would actually generate, which would actually exceed the projected shortfall that the city of Loveland is sharing with you at around the $3.5 million. The other one that wasn't bolded that was a priority within our group is the part that has additional bullets, which is the remove the non-essential programs from general fund. This discussion that we had in our group was really based on the information that was shared with you as part of the trivia questions around how much does the city generate from renting out the parks, the fairgrounds, the Polian building, What do we actually make back as a city for those services? So there's a great discussion in our group around what is the city providing and what are they actually recovering, and is there a way to recover some of those costs and still create a great value and give quality back to the citizens of Loveland for what it is that we enjoy and love about our city. So really evaluating what those services are, how much we're charging, and if we can create less discrepancy in that piece, and then the reduction of scope of program and looking at what the city is currently providing in terms of scope of services and if that can be reduced and still maintain the quality. And those were our top three. I don't know if anyone from our group has anything to add to these. Anything to add? Okay. Do you have anything to add to it? No. Okay. The other ones that are a little unique, and I feel in full disclosure I should share why they're on our list. A couple that will stand out as unusual, I think, from our group to other groups. Full disclosure, I work in tobacco control policy. I work for an agency out of Washington, D.C. and cover 10 states. So I talked with our group a little bit about city tobacco tax and the numbers that we could generate with that possibility, and then licensure at the city level. And what I shared with our group is that Colorado is one of 7 states that currently doesn't license or require tobacco retailers to be licensed. So you can essentially set up in the back of your trunk of your car and you can sell cigarettes and you can continue to sell to minors without any penalty. And it really hamstrings our state and the city because there's no way to really follow through and penalize our retailers if they are doing this. And so there's a way to capture some fees associated with that, which would benefit the city, and then just hold our retailers a little more accountable in terms of they are selling to minors to have something for us to go back to on that end. So that's why those are on there. Just some group discussion we had around some possible revenue and then benefits in terms of quality also for our city.
Adrian.
Yes?
I'm just curious, and this is just your impression of the group you were in, but when you have Metro District downtown set their property tax increases, was your group aware of the fact that commercial and industrial property are already paying 3.7 times more than an equally valued residential property in property taxes already?
That specific one with the numbers generated that I mentioned, the $3.9 million compared to the $3.5 million shortfall that we're projecting came from Neil, and that was really kind of based on some work he had done prior to coming into the group as a possible suggestion. So he was planning to expand on that tonight, should there be any questions, because that was really one of his focal points. It was group discussed, but
I'm not sure whether that's a yes or no.
well, I can't answer that for the group, and that really did come from Neil. I mean, if others in my group want to chime in, if they were aware of that, I facilitated the discussion, but I don't feel it's appropriate for me to answer for whether or not they have that understanding.
Well, what does it require further investigation? We're just going to have to figure out if CFAC can review it at our next meeting, or if it's going to be possible to get an answer within staff before we have to write a report, or is the questions we have to go forward, with investigation. We've had some questions about real estate in town that we can wrestle with more than a year. This might fall into a similar category. Larry?
That first one, did you really mean eliminating the annual funding of the discretionary part of the council reserve fund? And if I remember right, they said 15% of the money, general revenues go into the reserve fund, but a lot of that is obligated, and there's just a percentage of that amount of money is discretionary. Right or wrong?
That particular reserve is 5% of the tax revenue. Okay,
5%?
over, huh?
2.5.
It was 5% of the tax revenue. We just went down to 2.5 this year. Thank you very much.
The reserve fund. And it's all
Right.
discretionary?
It's for capital projects, council capital.
Council just voted to reduce that amount from 5% to 2.5%.
How much money would that be?
The 15% that you're talking about is our target for what we'd like to retain in our fund balance as undesignated to be able to respond to opportunities and challenges, disasters, that sort of thing. So they're two different.
And as we talked about with all these, there's pros and cons to all of these choices. So there was one that rose to the top number. Ralph?
Yes.
Jody, can you expand a little bit on what the discussion was around fees on downtown parking?
Yes, as a possible source of revenue, the folks in our group had suggested the consideration of adding to our downtown parking, metered parking versus the time limitations that we currently have, the 2-hour threshold of charging for parking, and adding meters. And then also doing the same with the new parking structure that was purchased once that would be expanded on to also have paid parking through that. Again, great discussion we had on pros and cons, and especially around the development of downtown and the interest of developing and incentivizing people to go downtown, and how that might not incentivize and then create an opposite effect of people not wanting to visit downtown if they do have to pay for parking and they can avoid paying that somewhere else, i.e. in the Centera district. So that was a big discussion, and obviously not one that was prioritized, but as a facilitator, I definitely reminded them that that could be, not incentivize them to go downtown. So, any other questions for us as a group, or anyone in my group that wants to add anything that I may have missed? No?
All right, then let's go green. John Smella, my vice chair of CFAC.
All right, so we kind of had a great discussion around what I call kind of more process or directive type solutions. In particular, I think people have commonly shared this from a prioritization perspective, which is to focus in on the things that are essential to provide as a government, which are certainly safety as well as infrastructure and streets. So kind of giving that as a lead directive that that should be prioritized at any discussion we come to about any kind of cuts. This next point, which I think is relevant to some of the very first conversations we had, which was that each department head and employee should rank order cost and importance of service provided. And so basically make sure the people of the business, the employees, are involved in that process. The reason I think this is a great point is that when John brought up earlier, and Dave as well, about the idea of being involved in this discussion. And this discussion is wider than just the CFAP, right? It's wider than what we're here today, and that's that. And some of you do serve on other commissions and boards. That opportunity exists for all of us to be involved in those different boards and commissions at the level that can be really impactful. I can quite honestly say, as a Citizen Finance Advisory Commission member for a number of years now, that when a budget comes in front of you, you can't fully comprehend the details of that unless you have hours upon hours to study it. And frankly, even beyond that, unless you're involved in that group, you fully appreciate those details. So I think one of the best ways that we as a group can help get to that level of the detail that I think John's really trying to drive at is ultimately be a person that's involved in that group, having to make those decisions. But I think the city has done this classically, and this will be a part of the process in this coming year, to involve their department heads, their leadership, as well as their employees to try and dig down into these details, let them be a part of the process, not simply drive a top-down approach. That's where we can all engage in that discussion. And that's kind of what this discussion really went in our group in terms of trying to really allow that more organic approach to come into this process. And then kind of secondly, our run-on sentence there in the second bullet, incent the city employees to come up with solutions to the gap. Right? So I work for Hewlett-Packard. We're trying to recruit folks out of into our business. We incent our employees when they bring folks in, and we hire those folks. Similarly, when you come up with the best ideas, right, get rewarded for that. And yes, that's at an incremental cost of some kind. But the hope is that the benefit is large enough that that cost has a great return on investment. Third, I think just again a general directive: avoid across-the-board cuts, create visibility. I think we had a great discussion on ensuring that ultimately the decision made, again, from the top-down approach where a city manager says, strike this and just move on, and we're really trying to allow council to be the final say, which I think happens in process no matter what, but that ultimately there's good visibility to the choices that are being made, right? And ultimately, if there are fee increases or cuts, that the public has a made awareness in that process. I think that generally represents our group. Jerry's still here. Are there any other comments from the group you guys want to add? Or questions from anybody else? Good job. Tim?
I was a member of the group. I felt that the first item up there is an answer rather than a process, and my impression was that this group should be working on process more than the answer. I think it take for granted that police and fire, the streets are going to be a top priority in any kind of decision process. The reason I suggested the second item, and the reason was that, well, in interest of clarity, I'm a former member of the library board. The items that were put on the list, first list for selection, did not include what I think the library director or I would consider the most important functions of the library. So I wasn't sure to what extent this group was being presented a fair selection of the sub-items in the library budget that should be addressed. And as I was general sensing from the group that we're being asked to rank order, express preferences on things based primarily on our emotional view of the value without having the cost before us. And I agree with John that there's no sensible way to reach a valid decision on the value of any service without knowing what the cost is. Some measure of cost benefit. And I'm not convinced that department heads have, to this point, been required to rank order within their own department of what they feel is the best bang for the buck. Let me give an example. Every year in the budget, the library director presents a financial analysis of the various functions of the library. 60+% comes from the book collections. But the book, there was nothing in the items that we were given to discuss about the book collection. So my point is, how valid are the individual items that we ranked in the first session, we ranked again in the second session? How representative are they of what the department really does? The department head should have a very good view of that in his own mind, and also an employee should have, and they may not agree. But without having that sort of a cost-benefit assessment in their minds, how in the world can anybody reach a valid conclusion? Well, whether or not these ideas are clearly expressed in those words up there, that's what I think a number of us in this group are trying to see is yet brought out before the final decisions are made.
Call the seat back to member Joe.
So Renee, correct me if I'm wrong, you've already gone through this process with employees, right? Department heads to give the city that input around what cuts are most appropriate, that they would know what solution, creative solution might they consider within their department. Provide, I think, is maybe what you're talking about.
Well, did that drive the list of items that we were given to consider for the library?
I think we covered in the last meeting that all the departments did service inventories. Now, those service inventories did not have dollar values associated with them, but that's where we took that list from.
Who made the selection from that list?
We did over in the budget area.
How could you do that without knowing some idea of the cost benefit for the items on that list?
Now remember, we were just getting a feel for what you felt about those particular services, and that does not do anything toward the decision about whether those are going to be funded or not. We were just getting those in the context of the bigger picture. And so I get what you're talking about, that the dollars and cents really do make sense. You've got to take a look at that cost benefit.
Well, it's not only dollars and cents. If Ted believes that the book collection is the most beneficial aspect of the library, and I would happen to agree with him, why wasn't that on the list for us to consider?
Circulation probably should have been aligned.
I don't mean
Well, it is the material that
Okay.
moves back and forth between the patrons of the library. So we understand what you're saying. We'll make sure that that disclaimer is put in our report. And keep in mind that every year these department heads are required to go through and analyze their services and how they can best deliver those services. When we were responding to the 6061, 101 ballot measures, all departments looked through all of their services and gave us how we might respond to that. And if you'll remember, that was a 20% reduction. So that same pool of information will be used in this decision-making process.
But from my experience on the library board, that was not done at the time I was on the board. Because the board didn't get to share in that at least. Should they not have had an input? All right, I'll shut up. But I'm using the library because that's where I have specific personal experience. But I think my comments apply to a lot of different services. of departments that have multiple functions. Yeah, in this process, we're being asked to decide on the priority of multiple functions. And you can't do that without better information that this group has been presented.
Any other questions specific for the Green Group? I asked last month when we got started how many of us are here because we're members of boards and commissions, how many invited by a council member, and then how many saw the announcements and decided you had to commit to being here. I'd like to ask the boards and commission members, just show your hand if you know that between now and July, you are going to have discussions in your meetings about the budgets for your departments. So there are people sitting in this room that are going to come out from these meetings and are going to go into their regular board and commission meetings for the next few months and are seeing process and priorities and questions about value to the city, and will have that immediate contact with the partners leaders on what's going to happen for the city. So there is an additional value to the collaboration and having the boards and commission members in here hearing what members of the public have to say. Grade.
Actually,
Go ahead.
that's a question.
Okay, question?
Well, I was in the Loveland group and both had that same one about department heads. And my argument for that, I work for the county, and we're currently, our division is currently in the process of doing strategy mapping, and each of those mapping areas have to have performance measures to support them. So, my particular area that I oversee, I've got to come up with hard numbers, how many, how much, and that sort of thing. So if that go to that level where you are saying, okay, well, I serve X number of people and it costs X number of dollars a year, you've got to have those hard numbers in here. You can't just say, oh, everybody loved it, it's a great program or whatever. You need to know how many people you serve and what the cost to serve is.
I encourage you to share that with Renee, and there's certainly plenty of opportunity for the city and for the county staff to share techniques, best practices, information.
And it's not an easy process by any means.
All right, representative of the grade group. Is that us? Okay, thanks, Vern. That's why I need to have you here to keep me going. All right, we had 4 of us that got together and disappeared over into the conference room, and we got into a pretty deep discussion about processes and about what do we not know in these sessions. And the first one that really grabbed our attention is, do we know from the discussions that we had the last 2 weeks at that point, to what extent has the city already eliminated inefficiencies? To what extent, with the budget austerity measures that were put in place the last 2 years, was there consolidation? Where were the cuts made that should raise our confidence in the departments and in the leadership of the city? We came to a real conclusion that if we are going to make reductions in services that directly impact citizens, that there better be a qualitative analysis on it, not just popularity. And then we started to go other points that ask the question of, particularly what must we have as a city. That continues to come up as the vital services with fire, police, and infrastructure. What does the city have to do to prevent, undesirable instances? It might be a cost savings to eliminate code enforcement, but I think the first neighborhood that would be, have an adverse, effect by not having the inspectors coming around would protest that. But then it is legitimate to ask, what can be shifted to a private function, what can be shifted to fee-based. And, I felt overwhelmed by the people that were in the room with me, and Reba is not here, but Gary's here, and Vern, and Arthur, anything else that needs to be brought up about that list. We kept it kind of short and to the point. We really debated that, the one in the middle there of, what does Loveland value, what's important. Gary.
Yeah, Gary Thomas from Transportation Board. I put that first one down on the page first, and I think it addresses some of the issues we've heard tonight. If we're really being asked to make a decision between what services do we keep and what do we eliminate, to me, the first question is have we cut to the bone already, so that when we turn something off, we know that that's the decision we have to make. And if you remember those strips of paper we did the first night, one of them was maintain vehicles. That's a high priority, right? It doesn't speak to how many vehicles we should have, it just we ought to change oil on the ones we have. So the first question is, do we have the right number of vehicles? And then we can ask the question.
Any questions for the gray group?
I've got a question. I
Please.
just address it to you. That one that was up there, I can't repeat it, but it was, what does Loveland value? What do we value city of Loveland? That is not an absolute. That varies depending upon the condition extant at the time that you're asked the question. What Loveland valued in the days of great income, when Centera was building and we had this tremendous sales tax revenue, and Old City was building and getting building permit revenues and all of that. The big heart of Loveland would be a very high value, because we extended out to a lot of different groups and segments in the society. When you don't have the money, what's important for Loveland? And you're not contexting. It's as though there's some absolute out there and money doesn't have anything to do with it. And money has everything to do with what we're here for, I thought. And I didn't think that grand vision was what we were here for. If we're here for that, I don't have any, so I've wasted my time here.
Well, I'm not.
I have ideas on specifically what you do when you're faced with having to cut down expenses, because I've been through it in business, and I know how to do it. So I just want to put this thing in perspective and look, what those values were 5 years ago ain't there anymore. We can't afford them. It was wonderful when we could. But you got to cut $3.5 million of spending out of this city. And if you're going to approach the process with, gee, what's good for Loveland, you're going to lose. It's not going to happen. And that's my view.
Well, and I'll have to tell you that there is a well-developed discipline in both strategic planning, operational management, that allows for the inclusion of values-based decision-making, even when you are dealing with fiscal issues. And to ignore what are community values, what is the community vision for the future, is not a strategic decision-making process. That's crisis management. And the council reserve gives City of Loveland some ability to deal with crisis management on a yearly basis to make sure that year for year, revenues and expenditures match and the city does not go into debt. Loveland has never gone into debt. I have highest confidence that Loveland will never go into debt. What we are looking at is the long-range strategic picture, going out the next 3 to 5 years, to make some incremental and fundamental changes. What do we have to do to close that small $3.5 million gap? That is not an overwhelming factor in the fiscal health of the city. We identify it, we have to deal with it. But you know, to say that your contributions or anybody's contributions who is very fiscally focused is wasted because we included values and community vision in this process, no, that I think that's going a little bit too far. We do value your input, and it will have its place as the process goes forward. Please.
Balancing budget, balance means you have to take away some things, but you have to increase some things. So it's balanced. So I think besides cost cutting, which is extremely important and part of the matter, we also need to consider ways to bring in more money.
Well, I think the comments that have been brought up about identifying proper fees, identifying core functions of government are about. Janet, did you want to add something?
It was basically the same thing, but the last point, economic development, I think it, you know, any budgetary item that go toward encouraging economic development, they have a payoff a little further down the road, but I think they definitely have to be in the mix, is that generating more income will be part of getting rid of that gap. And we can't just say, well, we don't have the money, we can't afford that. We have to do both. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Ready to move on? Who's next? Pink. Who was part of the pink group or facilitated the pink group? Did we scare everybody off from the pink group? I know there are a few people who had some scheduling conflicts tonight. Again, this is going to be captured. It will be brought forward in the report, and council will have a chance to review these items.
Similar to
Okay. So if there's nobody here to speak for the pink group, we'll move on. Orange. Rhymes with orange. Dave Clark, everybody.
Thank you. We had a few, three of them. There's Stacy's here and I'm trying to
yeah.
So and I think there's one missing. We had a discussion. We broke ours into two areas. If we had to increase revenues, how to do that. If we had to decrease expenses, how do we do that? So we split it up in that area. To increase revenue, again, kind of go along with what other people have been saying, any service that competes with private service should raise fees to cover expenses is one way to look at that. These are just ideas that we're putting out. We certainly don't have solutions or detail with it, but that's one way to look at that. And then, even though no one really wants to think about it, evaluate some kind of sales taxing or some kind of tax increase. Sales tax was one of those. And one of the points that was made during the discussion was, I think the $3.5 million deficit would be covered by a 0.8% increase. Is that right, Alan? In the sales tax. Now, we don't want to do that, but that's real money. So if we had some combination, that would be something that could be evaluated. Although probably not a good solution at this stage. Decrease expenses. Again, prioritize services. What we thought of is to take all the services that we were talking about, categorize them, which has been done already, and then prioritizing those categories to kind of break down the big picture into smaller elements and trying to work through that, which is something that's been going on here. And I think you had an example of what Maryland County had done with their budget shortfall. They were looking through as well. So we gave that to Renee, and it's just something else to look at. Consider the full impact of each reduction. Oftentimes you have unintended consequences when you make a cut somewhere, so it needs to be evaluated to make sure we've got everything covered. Evaluate largest expense categories first. Kind of goes back to what John brought up earlier. If the fire has a $1 million budget and some other department has a $500 or $5,000 budget, you're not going to get $3.5 million out of the $5,000 budget. So let's not spend a lot of time worrying about nickel and dime. Focus on some big areas that we can really consider the big impacts. And someone already mentioned this, incentivize cost reductions. Not sure how to do that, but in private business, oftentimes that's done. In personal homes, families, that's done with kids and so on to help reduce expenses. Some way to incentivize to those are our discussions. Dixie, have any comments on that? Yes, ma'am.
In the increasing revenue again, this doesn't seem like fees, increasing fees and increasing taxes are the only ways to do that. I think economic development is so important that we increase your tax base without raising taxes.
I agree with you. We did not spend a whole lot of time on that side of the column. We were more focused on decreasing expenses. So we got a couple of things down and then we didn't go any further on that.
Question, Dave. On that first bullet point, any service that competes with private services should raise their fee to cover expenses. Why not just privatize it and you get rid of the whole thing? I mean, I don't see why you do what you're doing.
I think that's an excellent point. I know the city has looked at privatizing some services in the past. Sometimes they found out it was better, sometimes they found out it was better to keep it themselves. So, yeah, I agree that's a valid way that should be looked at.
Dave, I want to say something about that, because that was one of the things that I brought up as well. Sometimes I think there's issues that you don't necessarily realize. For instance, there's private trash pickup, but Loveland has our own trash, and because of that, several things have happened. One, first of all, we don't have 10 different heavy trucks driving on our streets. They would pick up trash at every house because everyone has a different private provider. And so there's issues in there sometimes that unless you really understand the whole picture, you might not realize what the advantage is that it's a city service versus just a private service.
So some of those unintended consequences that could come about if you didn't evaluate it. Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Dave, thank you. Orange Group Brown. All right. Brad is one of those CFAC members who's got a whole whopping 45 days on the job today.
Hurry and hurry. We had some great conversations. I think the center around a lot of what's already been discussed. But we had talked a great deal about Chilson and about equalizing the tax rates, and your point well taken about the improvements out there. We wanted to generalize a little more than that because we didn't, not being privy to a lot of years of dealing with this, we didn't know if there were other instances where there was tax rate inequality, where there might be some something as in the Chilson Center that we could equalize the tax rate. So we wanted to be very all-inclusive, that there may be other areas where we can recover tax revenue that we currently aren't. We talked about city department cost reductions because we actually brought up the discussion about if you had to reduce because of the tax measures, you know, what department reductions would be prioritized. We felt that that's a very important thing to go back and look at to try to eliminate waste. But it also centered around, we had a conversation about what the essential services of the city level were, and that would be part of the discussion of department reductions in making sure that we were just providing essential services. And I guess from our previous meetings, we were looking at the have-to-have segment of all of the services, and then getting rid of, as we discussed on the next bullet point, getting rid of the not essential and not nice-to-haves, and evaluating the nice-to-haves as to how important they were. And this goes back a little bit to the vision, because we were talking about, we discussed a lot about what the nice-to-haves category was, and we had some disagreement about, you know, how important the nice-to-haves were. But then also we talked about privatization of services that had been or could be, and it goes back to, I think, the Orange Group, where we have competition with private industry, we should probably examine, does the city need to enter into competition? Can a private entity actually be more cost effective, and can they then return revenues to the city rather than being an expense?
In that area of privatization, would that include the options perhaps to establish a nonprofit to run that business? So it's something, again, that's not run by the city, nor is it run by a private business. It would be run by a nonprofit. Would that be?
Well, in our discussions, we actually didn't talk about what the mechanism would be to do it. I'm sure that that would be available. We were actually just looking at a little higher level in that there were services. Well, the two we mentioned were the Loveland and the Chilson. We just felt like if, in fact, it was a service that would benefit the city, that it probably should be able to be paid for, which meant that it could be privatized, and there would be the possibility of having someone making a profit off that rather than a city of Loveland endeavor.
It seems like the important part is that it's not a city of Loveland endeavor. So we're eliminating the costs associated with the city. And how those costs are picked up would be something we could still be on.
That was the thrust of our conversation.
So I was just thinking in terms of it not necessarily needing to be an either or. I mean, because certainly we're seeing the relatively public-private partnerships that are going on in that piece of it too. And so that's certainly an option to eliminate that either you have it done.
Well, and a little bit of the conversation revolved around if we were able to sufficiently recover all the costs involved with it, then that's a more favorable thing for the city to maintain or to provide. A lot of discussion was around why should we be subsidized if in fact it's a vital service to the city.
Other questions or comments on that, Ed? Okay. Facilitator for the red group was John Case. I received a message from him this afternoon that he's tied up with a meeting in Fort Collins.
He wasn't in our group, but that did.
That was the red group? Yeah? Okay, I'm sorry. All right, eventually I'm going to find John's group and I'm going to...
He was in the group then.
Was it? Okay. Another one of our long-term 45-day veterans of CFAC. Yeah.
Thanks. Our group was very efficient, I have to say, and I appreciate that. Focused a great deal on labor costs, and Buddy, jump in.
Sure.
This was your thing. And I think you spoke to it better than I
did.
did.
The way we looked at it, we looked at labor costs, and we kind of looked at a holistic view of this thing. And all of us in that group had been involved with enterprises, whether we were executives at one time or big six consultants for these folks. Anytime you have a cost problem, and if labor is your largest item, you got to start looking at labor. You got to close the labor equation. You have to close the revenue problem. Loveland's got a 65% labor cost problem. One of the ideas we had, we talked about pay cuts. Rather than doing resource actions and laying off people, talk to the employees of the city of Loveland. Rather than seeing their friends, their neighbors lose a job, talk about taking pay cuts for a period of time to keep everybody employed. Look at changing the 401k contributions. That's a cash flow discussion. Labor reduction. We're going to have attrition in the city. There are going to be folks that are not happy with pay cuts. They may leave. That's going to give you an opportunity not necessarily backfill those positions. It's going to continue to improve your cash flow situation. Utilization. Start looking at some benchmarks with other cities. What's the type of performance you're getting per work unit created against cost of unit provided? And the types of services you're getting. Instead of saying, this feels good or looks nice, let's benchmark ourselves against other communities, big, small, etc. Also looking at insurance and benefits. One of the numbers that came out that we heard from the city council the other day, I asked a question about insurance. Loveland is a self-insured city up to the first $150,000 in medical claim per employee. After that, it has a stop-loss clause and another insurance program today. So ought to be looked at to say, is that frugal for the city to do right now with an aging workforce? Because most employees in this city, after they've been here for 5 years, stay beyond that. The city may be taking an exposure level that it doesn't necessarily need. Plus, with the workman's comp, in the city council meeting, I believe it was at
the end of January or February, they didn't close that piece of business with Pinnacle, and that's hanging out there. Now, I don't know if that's been closed as of 14 February when it was supposed to be the contract renewed, but there was a big piece hanging out there, and we shouldn't let things go that long as it relates to insurance. And looking at the benefits packages, it was talked about even tonight, it was 30%. So we need to look at those things. And the pros of that, we looked at cost, cash flow, labor equalization, but the cons were you're going to have service impact, publicity may also be a big problem. It's going to be a tough political decision for those that get elected to office to swallow.
Thanks so very much. And then the Revenue Plus side, our group, like it sounds like many other groups, talked about the Centera situation. I think similarly, I don't need to touch too much on that unless somebody would like to jump in from the group.
Tom Buchanan had the best view on that.
Yeah, we'd like to, I know this is a deal with Centera Metro District, and they've got to deal with the city. You know, I was just thinking maybe they could be nice guys and say for the next 5 years, we're going to do this in this bad economic time. This Centera Metro District was created when we were in good times. So that we're in bad times now. And one of the things that we're looking at was the service usage. I'd like to know who is paying for the fire trucks that go out there, the police, the snow removal. I don't know where that's itemized anywhere. And so those are some of the things we'd like to know. What's going on with the Centera Metro District and who's paying for that? Is the city of Loveland proper paying for that? Or are they paying the city of Loveland for those services? So that's just something, I just don't want to see anybody getting away with anything for nothing. And so that's that. I've got more to say on other issues than this.
Thank you. And then finally, we chatted similarly about other groups.
You got to take a slide.
I know. Yeah, these are our top 3. So, or the revenue, the rental conversation. You know, with the facilities that we rent, why are we not, breaking even and making a little bit more?
If we start to market those, some of the local businesses may get upset because we're competing.
Yeah, the pros and the cons there. You can go to the next slide. We chatted a little bit about investment fund management. We just touched on that. And I thought this should have been a little higher, just as a facilitator, membership participation in organizations and making sure that that participation is beneficial wholly and not just an obligation that we're paying. Did you want to chat about that one?
No, I'd just like to go back to the labor and cost thing now. Now, it seems to me that when government employees being on the private side of this thing, everybody that I work with has not had a raise, much less in the last 5 years. Been pretty tight. And we see government employees almost saying, I'm going to get a 2.5% raise, and we're going, what's with that? And then the straw man argument is they're going to go somewhere else. Where are they going to go? I would love to be able to go somewhere else, but in this hard economic times, I'm happy to have a job. So I stick with it because that's what it takes to raise a family, is having an income with some benefits and everything else. So that issue of where they're going to all run off to Berthoud, Fort Collins. Fort Collins isn't hiring anybody either. So I think it's time for the public sector to get in line with the private sector and just realize they're going to have to go through some hard times too. And Dave Falk, you mentioned nickels and dimes. Well, my mama told me you watch the nickels and dimes and the dollars will take care of themselves. And that's what I'm hearing a lot of people say here is, we don't know where the money's going. It's nice you have a budget. I look at a budget as a wish list and how good can you present your case that I'm going to need this money. Well, you might have a budget for $400, but if you spend it all at Starbucks, I want to know that. So I just like to know if the city has any transparency to how the money was actually spent, or this could be the next crusade, like the recycle thing where we got all these national acclaim in your budget process, is that I want the city of Loveland to be transparent so that we can look anywhere and say, this is where they actually spent the money, instead of it was in the budget somewhere. Because you make anything look good that you need it for the budget, but I want to know where the checks were written, who they were written to, so we can have a better informed citizen, because not everybody can be on a board. So
It was a hot topic for Tom, was budget versus actual expense, and where did it go to? And I have to agree with him.
that's right. And then I had another friend that talked about the Rialto. When I told her about this little thing, she said, "Oh, but I like the Rialto. It's the only place my kids can go and stuff." And I told her, everybody has to suffer in bad times. I'm sorry, if you have to pay more to go to Rialto, then you're going to have to pay more, because we have to stop providing services that we cannot afford.
The impassioned appeal here makes me want to say a few things, just to make sure you guys realize we are skating without doing some reduction work. The general fund did eliminate 21 positions. We did take furlough days, and nobody got raises. So I just want to make sure that you realize we're not out there doing things ineffectively, if you will, in these bad times. And so be aware of that.
Bernie,
We're taking our hits
Bernie,
as
does
well.
CFAC get budget to actual information?
We get budget to actual information. All that information is available on the website. It's the first council meeting of every month. If you are interested in a particular thing, everything is open record. We'll be happy to provide it for you.
Jody.
I just also want to say, just in this process, as a feedback member, how much, I think Bernie's already mentioned, that we invite the participation and the discussion. This is really helpful. And I just want to reiterate my colleague John's point earlier about, this is really an invitation for us to participate with the city in what we value and what we see as possible reductions down the road. We are in the luxury of not being in a crisis, and having to make cuts rapidly without being mindful and intentional in these cuts. And I think it's a rare and unique opportunity for a city or a state or a government elected body to really invite the community and be inclusive. And I think that we're missing that in some of this, and I just think it's important to reflect on that a little bit, that this is a unique opportunity. This isn't the only opportunity. It's part of a big vision and a big process, but I think it's rare for that invitation to the community to participate. It's fairly unique. And I know as a CFAC member and as a member of this community, that I greatly appreciate that invitation, rather than have the city hand us, this is what we're doing, and no involvement. I think it demonstrates a real intent from the city management and the city council to say we value the input of this community, we value the participation on the board as a volunteer, we value you as a citizen, to invite you into this process rather than to hand you, this is what's going to happen to you in our city.
That concludes the reports from the breakout groups from last week. We'll step back to the first meeting, February 2nd. Let's show this, and then let's give everybody a stand up, maybe walk over to the necessary, and then we will have to come back so that we can be completed before 8 o'clock. This is what showed up on the board the first night. When we opened up our white folders and we had our Loveland Valentine hearts, what do you like, what's important to you about Loveland? So with that on the screen, let's take 4 or 5 minutes, stand up, walk around, hit the necessary rooms, and then we're going to come back and we're going to review and summarize the results of the first exercise with prioritizing the city general fund services. And again, you do have everything in your handouts. There are some extra handouts, and you'll be able to get PDF, computer file copies of them also. On what you love about Loveland and show you what we learned and what your contributions are to the process as it will go forward. When we had the first session, we laid out all of the general fund services and dropped them into the green, orange, red bowls. Here's the summary of the green list. And we put this up this way because it's a little bit easier to look at it in one piece and see that in the process of having everyone together, we identified that these are essential services, that Loveland would be harmed if we could not maintain these services. Nice to haves, we had to do a second session on this last Wednesday. Remember, we had to show the cards and have the other chart up over here because we couldn't quite decipher some of the nice to have services that ended up with ties for number of, for placement from the first night. And so you'll see we have the solid capital column here on the left and then the other two columns. Still nice to have, but we had to break some ties to try and raise the emphasis.
So, does those on the left have the higher priority or not?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. We did do that second exercise of red and green just because there were too many that had, exact matching priorities. And the next one. Okay, and here's pretty much a consensus list that, again, will be reported forward and has to be considered by CFAC and will be presented in this manner to council as being current general fund services that really have to be evaluated for, are they fee structured, are they properly structured, what is the risk and the benefit to the city if fees associated with them or even privatization are considered. So again, you have this in your handouts. We are going to continue to report this information forward. I've been at this for 4 years now. And I'll tell you that the first year trying to look at the city budget was quiet, listen, learn, listen to the questions of other people, make a few selected questions. We are fortunate to be in Loveland.
Could you explain something to me?
Go ahead.
Reduced cost per unit. I don't know what that means.
Renee, please.
Sure. So you're providing the same service that you are now, but is there a way to reduce the cost associated with providing each one of those units? If you have lane miles of road that you are maintaining, is there a cheaper way to do it so that you can reduce the cost per lane mile? Would be an example of that.
All right, applying that to a social program, the library, the Children's Center, anything like that. How do you define a unit to reduce the cost per unit? How do you unitize a social service?
It could be by checkout, it could be by customer, it could be, there's lots of, person or individual served. There's ways you'd have to equate it down to what do you serve to? Is it, what are you tracking? Are you tracking to a book? Are you tracking to the number of checkouts? Are you tracking to the number of citizens used? You'd have to equate, each one of them wouldn't be the same, it would be different for different things across the city. That's one of the approaches you could lay.
Thank you.
And that's one of the values of the performance measurement system that was brought up earlier, right? And we do have some of that going, and it is available in your budget, so keep that all in mind too.
Loveland has a tradition and a real commitment to fiscal accountability, fiscal conservatism. You don't have to be around too many people with the city council or, particularly with the city staff. We've witnessed it in CFAC over the years. CFAC sees the internal audits. CFAC sees the external compliance audits. We go through the comprehensive annual financial report. We do see what each department produces and gives to the city manager. We listen to what the city council brings back as being issues and concerns with budgets, and when we have a chance to respond to those, we do. This is a different presentation of what you saw in the attachment if you received emails of the summarization of the ranked voting with the electronic devices. And it doesn't require a lot of explanation because, you know, this is just the fact, this is the results of what we did in the groups. I've always had the experience since I graduated from college that when you start a large project, a large mission, you have some foundational requirements from your senior leadership, from your shareholders, your stockholders, the board of directors, or in my case, it was always a rather demanding general officer. This is what I see as being those imperatives of what the effort that we've had these last 3 weeks is adding to CFAC and is adding to the city staff so that we can continue forward with the effort to reduce and eliminate the fiscal imbalance, to ensure the fiscal health of Loveland for years that are to come and possibly for future generations. More survey results on social services. Perhaps this was a simplistic way to try and answer questions about the taxpayer bill of rights. Tabor always requires more examination and careful consideration of the legal requirements and also the case law that has developed. And we've addressed that tonight, and we'll have to see how that balances out in the future. Yes?
I'm sorry, I know I was here. However, why is police and fire separate and then lumped with something else where it says police and fire yes, then it says police, fire, parks, and streets no? I'm sorry.
There are different variables for how voters in the past in Loveland have approved Tabor revenue retention measures. The Tabor overrides, the debrucing measures. And so the question becomes is if we're going to keep the excess tax collections, the sales tax collections, what level of support does the public have for certain combinations of purpose? And so these would be purposes of Tabor revenue retention. And some combinations are more conducive to the group that we have than others. Yeah.
I'd like to point out with respect to all the slides you've shown, the X's are not all equal. So in a column where almost everything was X for no, there were differences in the level of the no vote or the yes vote.
Yes, and again, this is a summary just for the purposes of the presentation tonight. The complete data of all responses, you know, as Frank brought up, the bars of the responses that actually showed up, and we did it last week, are more telling of the preferences within the group. That will be retained, that will be presented, we will have to look at it in CFAC, and we will give it to council.
Well, my point is those differences need to be reflected in the decision process later on. It's not as simple as saying X, because everything is...
That's absolutely true.
On the ones where you're talking the access.
But I think you spoke about quantitative, that it was 7 yes, 6 no, that it was that close, it wasn't like, it's kind of...
So we'll have the pie charts.
The X represented that it was less than 50% said yes. more than 50% said no. But within the yes votes, there was a significant gradation between the different categories.
We are going to present all that information.
Well, presented or taken into account when you're forming recommendations.
Well, okay, if your terminology is taken into account, then yes, it is taken into account. My terminology is to present recommendations for consideration by decision makers. So you're absolutely right. That's the truth of what's going to happen.
Can we go back to that last slide? Now, this right ways to reduce expenditures that you had up there, is that an extract from the data that you collected from all the last couple of sessions, or where did this come from?
That came from the electronic voting provider. So,
that's where I thought. I just wanted to make sure what the source was.
First priority, second priority, third priority, fourth priority. This is just sort of how it fell out in the ranking.
So that's a roll-up of 4 or 5 questions? Or was it 4 questions?
4 slides.
Yeah.
So if again, this is summary level material. So if the percentage showed it as high as in the second preference, but it was already listed as the first preference, then we went to the next percentage down.
One question, Ralph, since the CFAC, and I apologize for my lack of knowledge there, you're looking at the budget of the city. How often do you go back and look at the revenue projections of the city? Is that done, revenue target versus actualization of revenue incurred? Do you review that monthly or quarterly? And the reason and when you temper and look at that budget outlook from a revenue creation, are you looking at broad global economic changes, such as, right, I'll just use the fact that cost of wheat's going up because of floods in Australia, global demand in China, and needs elsewhere in the world, may affect long-term revenue in the city of Loveland because folks may not come for a fair, or they might not do this, or it may change, discretionary spending they've got. How does that revenue number get adjusted or looked at, or how often is it looked at?
Well, it is looked at on a monthly basis. Okay. The city staff produces a report that is published and made available online, and print copies out here in the lobby. Renee reports it to the city council the first meeting of every month. Snapshot and what's the other title?
The snapshot is what we have.
The snapshot is the monthly report. The other thing that CFAC started doing 2 years ago is we developed a list of leading and lagging economic indicators that we found were key to either the revenue stream or to the expense stream of the city of Loveland. One of the vital services that Alan Merrick performs for the city is to produce what we started to call the dashboard, which is actually the fiscal indicators report. It's always up and available on the CFAC webpage, accessible through the city. CFAC members look at that every month. Once a quarter or more frequently, we look at it with Alan to try and find out if there are indicators that will push CFAC or push the city staff to say that things are either getting better or they're getting worse. Right now, I think we're monitoring 6 leading indicators and 5 lagging indicators. We're also getting information from John Kirkmerrick about financial reports and the predictions coming out of the State Office of Economic Development and other, and other more reputable activities throughout the country. That effort from CFAC is part of what, raised the flag for the city staff that in 2008, 2009, 2010, there had to be some austerity measures.
Right now, if you're reviewing those measures every month, does that lead to action by the city staff to maybe pull a lever to say, okay, we've got to slow spending here?
City staff,
we need to look out.
City staff's working faster than we are.
Right.
I mean, when we only meet once a month,
right,
the city staff catches things,
yeah.
and
Well,
quite often
is
reporting. They're reporting results in
redesign
CFAC meetings, and this is what was identified, and this is corrective action that was taken.
Okay. I just wanted to understand how the process works, and maybe for the benefit of others, that, the city is pulling levers as they've got to.
An example is when we saw in the end of 2008, when when the economy started tanking big time. It happened in the last quarter of 2008. And by the time we got to a January advance or retreat with City Council, we already had plans and suggestions in place of how we were going to respond to the fact that our revenues were not going to come in as we originally projected them when we put that 2009 budget together. So we take those actions as necessary. And sometimes they're official action where we actually go to council and reduce the revenues, but most often it's reducing expenditures so that as those revenues come in at a lower level, we're still okay.
Jerry.
What is that first one mean out there? Explain that to us. What's that really saying? Street maintenance fee of 50%, are we getting 50% back, or is it cost us 50%?
You were asked a question on your electronic device that said that the current cost recovery generated by the fee maintenance, the fee that you see on your utility bill is 50%. And then you were asked a question, what percentage should it generate? The answer was 50%. So that was just your response to that question.
Rob, can I make a statement on the one on the bottom?
Please.
Yeah, one of the things, just so
you know. You got one statement, there's at least one other. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm on the plan, I'm the vice chair of the planning commission. I can tell you right now, the planning department, under the guidance of Bob Paulson here in town, have been working very hard to reduce the cost and make it more through doing things, changing their process, redesigning what they're doing, not backfilling jobs, but they're also looking at making it more streamlined for developers. And you've been there, John, with some of the things we do, coming to the planning commission to reduce the time required to be able to get a project going. So they're looking at how do we reduce costs, they're looking at how do we add value so that you can justify perhaps an increase in fees, but they're looking at it from both perspectives. They've got two customers they serve. One, we the citizens of the city of Loveland, and the developers and folks that want to bring business here. So they're trying to improve how they do business. So they're looking at this.
Other comment?
Everything is in percentage except for the podium, library room, lagoon, which is just a dollar amount. For fair comparison, shouldn't that be a percentage of what the full cost is? I don't quite understand that because everything else is percentage. That's just...
Okay, so the idea was, the way this was structured is, we had a question first that said, what do you think a percentage of revenue collection is recovery? And it turned out the answer was 10% currently. So that's just reflective of that first statement, is the knowledge that you now have that is 10% of cost recovery. And then the question was, what should it be?
Okay, well, this is now 10%. It says 10,000, make it 10%.
It's $10,000. Oh, that's right.
Is that one? What percentage of that is?
I don't have that percentage, you're right.
Okay, it should all be either cost amount or percentage, so you can have equal way of looking at it.
Right.
That's all. That's
Right.
Right.
Okay, so sorry, all we did was report back the first.
Right, and I didn't have to answer the question. Yeah.
Okay, great point, thank you.
Good, Tom.
I'd just like to thank CFAC and the city for doing this. I know you guys are going out of your way to have these meetings. I appreciate being able to stand up and speak my piece, even if I do it a little passionately. So,
thank you for having this.
We'll drive on. Excellent effort. We got a few more to go. We got a few more to go.
Is that the last one? That was the last one. That's why.
Oh,
I was looking at my book.
okay. So Tom's studying the book, and he caught me not looking at mine. Okay.
So can we have the CFAC members towards the back, because we do have a little gift, because we sincerely appreciate your contribution here. It means a lot to us. The total cost was $2 per person.